Hello, my name is Alicia Ford. My role is National Disability Coordination Officer, and I'm collaborating with ADCET on this event. This workshop is being live captioned. We also have captions available via browser, which will now be added to the chat box. I want to welcome you to this session, How to Talk with Your Colleagues About Universal Design for Learning, and our presenter, Thomas Tobin. Please note that information about captioning and etiquette for this session to run smoothly are in the chat and on the ADCET UDL Symposium page. This information will now be popped in the chat. The session is being recorded. Please turn off your camera and mic for the session if you do not wish to be in the recording. However, you are most welcome to stay on camera if you are happy to be recorded. Please use the Q&A function to post questions to the speaker, and you're very welcome to interact in the chat as well. When you do have your mic on to speak to the speaker, please ensure that your surrounding environment is quiet. Don't forget to tag us in your socials with hashtag UDL Symposium 2023. I will now hand over to you, Thomas.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you everybody for being part of our workshop today as well. My name's Tom Tobin. I'm with the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the United States, and I'm grateful to be here as part of the inaugural UDL Symposium sponsored by ADCET. This workshop, we're going to talk about how to talk to people who aren't here at the UDL Symposium about universal design for learning in a way that gets them to want to work with you. So first, let me introduce myself in a descriptive way. I'm a white man with gray hair and black glasses and a big black mustache. And also, let's talk about a little bit of housekeeping for our workshop today. This is going to be an interactive session. And what I'd love for you to have by the time you're finished is a way that you can spark conversations with people who might not know a lot about universal design for learning at your institutions. With that in mind, since we are using Zoom in the meeting function, you have control over your camera and your microphone. So if you would keep your microphone muted while you're not talking, that will give a better audio experience for all of us here. And if you'd like to have your camera on, I love seeing smiling faces and people's reactions, but if you'd like to have your camera off for any reason, please go ahead and turn it off. And lastly, I'm totally interruptible today. There's no Q&A function, so we're going to use the chat for whatever we've got going. And thank you, Kathleen, in the chat for saying a very impressive mustache. This is one of my calling cards. And when we're talking with each other, you also now have the option to come on the microphone. And you can find that under reactions and raise hand. If you raise your hand, we'll acknowledge you and you can come on the microphone if something that we're talking about sparks a story, you want to give support to something someone else said, or you'd like to ask a question. So with that in mind, let's actually dive in to our workshop. On your screen now is a title slide that says how to talk to your colleagues about universal design for learning. There's the ADCET logo, and there's a photo of me smiling in a suit. So as we get started, I'd like to go a little bit beyond the book. My colleague, Kirsten Beeling, and I in 2018 wrote a book called Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone, UDL in Higher Education. And there's an image of that book on your screen, but behind it are 3 other images. One of them shows a kangaroo hopping past a building that's on fire during some of the wildfires that ravaged across Australia in recent years. There's also someone in a middle photograph. There's a woman in a sweater or a jumper, and she's got a tissue up to her nose. She's homesick. And there's a third image of a car broken down by the side of the roadway. All of these are reasons to adopt universal design for learning. And we didn't talk about any of them in the book. We're going to go a little bit beyond that today. So climate events can take our students away from the formal spaces and places that we have designed for them, whether those are in-person spaces or online or technology mediated spaces. Our students can get sick, right? So it could be COVID, it could be the common cold, or anything in between. And bad things and bad luck can happen as well. You get a flat tire, you run behind on your schedule. There's a lot of different reasons why life intrudes on our lives as well as the lives of our students. And I see Kathleen in the chat is talking about modeling, incorporating verbal descriptions of the images. So thank you very much for noticing that we're doing that today. And as we start thinking about how to talk about universal design for learning with other folks, I want to suggest something a little radical. You probably by now know the official definition of universal design for learning from the neuroscientists at CAST. It used to be called the Center for Applied Special Technologies, CAST, in Boston, Massachusetts. When we talk about the 3 principles of UDL and the 31 checkpoints that are backed by research about how you can implement universal design for learning in learning interactions, our colleagues' eyes can kind of glaze over and they think, boy, that sounds like it's a lot of work. It sounds like it's really complex. It sounds like something that I have to change what I do and how I do it. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. But starting with, here's 31 things for you to think about, ooh, that doesn't work all that well. So in our workshop, let's start doing a little thinking together. So I see that we've got, what is it, 105 of us here today, which is a good number to do a little thinking. On your screen now is a group of students. They're all in a classroom, and most of them are looking off camera, paying attention, I think, to the instructor. There's one student who's in the front of the classroom, and she is turning right to you and handing over a piece of paper. Many of us are familiar with that disability accommodations paperwork. And when the student hands over that paper to one of your colleagues, let's assume it's one of your instructor colleagues, I'd like to ask, and we won't put music on or time, but let's do a little thought experiment here. What should your colleagues say to the student who's handing over the disability accommodation paperwork? So I'll put this question in the chat. What should your colleague say to this student? And you can post something in the chat, or you can use the raise hand feature in Zoom. We'll recognize you and you can come onto the microphone as well. But what should your colleague say to that student? And Andy says, we don't have paper anymore. It's always email. Okay, fair. When the instructor gets the email, what should they say to the student? We'll take a couple of seconds to pause here and let folks think and respond. While you're thinking, did you know that most instructors, when they ask, are there any questions, or they give students a prompt to think about, they wait an average of 6 seconds before they just barge right back into the lecture. So I wanted to make sure we gave you more than 6 seconds to do a little thinking and responding. And I see that I don't see anybody with a hand up in the Zoom session, but of course you can use that raise hand feature. It's under reactions. It might be under your more menu in Zoom. And we've got a lot of responses coming in through the chat. Let's see if we can find some patterns among these things in the chat. Jane says, thank you. How can I best support you? And a lot of people are putting thumbs up and support to that one. John says, thank you. What works best for you? Justin Kashmira says, try to know the needs of the student first. Tabitha says, how can I help you get the most out of our session? Belinda says, what has and hasn't worked in the past? Ooh, I like that. Jackie saying, thanks for this. How can I help you learn in addition to this? Is the plan enough? Because often format constraints don't cover things that might help. Nell is asking the student, would you like to have a chat? John says it's always good to have feedback. And we've got a bunch of things that are running around the theme of, thank you very much. How can I help? And what does the student need in order to be able to learn well? Fantastic. That is wonderful. That is the correct answer to this question. But this is a two-part question. Now, the same image on the screen, the students paying attention and the one student handing over the disability support paperwork. But the question is different. How might your colleague actually feel when they get that paperwork? How might your colleague actually feel when they receive that paperwork? Oh my gosh, the things are coming into the chat so fast. Okay, so stressed. Oh no, not again. Anxious. Oh great, more work. Irritated, more work. Sigh. Scared, nervous, worried about discriminating. Oh no, not another one. Some people are annoyed, often by the extensions, fearful, thinking they lack knowledge or lack the time. What do I do? Is that for real? Am I giving this student an advantage over the other students? I don't know what to do with this. Don't we have disability people to take care of this for me? Okay, so let's pause for a moment and thank you everybody for doing this little thought experiment with me to get our workshop started. When I asked how should our colleagues respond about the disability paperwork, you all did very well with that question. But it took you a minute. And I imagine some of you were thinking, boy, is there a trick to this question? No, it was a straightforward question. But when I asked how your colleagues actually might feel, I couldn't talk fast enough to keep up with all the things that were coming through the chat. And you notice that those feelings were often negative emotions. Angry that perhaps this is work that we didn't see coming, or it's quote unquote extra work. It's not, it's the law. Or nervousness that if I do this wrong, or I don't have enough information or background knowledge to respond well. Or it was confusion. How do I do this? This is a different thing than other accommodations I might have seen in the past. And a couple of people are saying, the faculty colleague or the instructor is happy that the student is getting the attention. But for every one of those responses, there were like 12 people saying, what do I have to do? What do I need to change in my course? Or is this being fair to the other students? Am I giving this one student an advantage? Now, let's give ourselves credit. We would never say those emotional things to the student. I mean, there's that one person who does, but we don't like that person all that much. We would never actually say that stuff out loud. Most of us would do what is necessary and do what is right. And Darren saying in the chat, oh my God, I know that person. No names, no names. But the point of this little thought exercise is that when we say universal design for learning to our colleagues back home at our institutions, they will think about their experiences with student disability accommodations and all of those negative emotions that can go along with them, even though we don't say those things out loud, will color their experience of when we share universal design for learning with everyone else on our campuses and at our institutions. So when we start thinking about how do we frame UDL for our colleagues, we have to be aware that their experience of inclusive design often begins and ends with their experience of working with a disability support office and with students who have disability barriers in their environments. So thanks everybody for the little bit of a thought exercise to get us thinking. Part one of our workshop is UDL advocacy. On your screen is an image of the Australian actress Sharina Clanton speaking through a megaphone at a rally for Aboriginal rights. And she is sending a clear message about what she wants other people to know and do. And we want to do something similar in terms of universal design for learning. And Andy is in the chat saying if we can share UDL as alleviating some of that stress and some of that workload, then it's win-win. Andy is on the track that I want everybody to think about today. So thank you for posting that in the chat. Good timing. On your screen, you saw this perhaps in the keynote a little bit ago. This is a group of students who are all studying together in a classroom, and there's the official definition of UDL on the screen, giving students multiple means of engagement. So how do they get engaged with us and then stick with us when things get challenging? Multiple means of representation. So putting captions, transcripts, having alternative versions of multimedia, and multiple ways to show what you know for people to take action and express themselves. And we also talked in the keynote about +1 thinking, simplifying things down to if there's one way for an interaction to happen now, and I'll expand on this, if there's one way for learners to interact with materials, and that's where we always start, our web pages, our virtual learning environments, our content that we post up on YouTube or wherever we put it. But also if there's one way for learners to interact with each other, with us as instructors, with support staffers at our institutions, with the wider community. If there's one way for any of that to happen now, we can make one more way. And that's a wonderful starting point for universal design for learning. And I love Ray's comment here in the chat that Sharina Clanton in the other image, her expression is gold, full of energy, passion, confidence, and strength. And those are words that I hope will describe you when you're talking about universal design for learning with your colleagues at your institution. So here is how I like to frame universal design for learning. And my hope is that you will start taking some notes for yourself, or maybe use the chat feature, or you can use the raise hand feature to come on the microphone, and let's start putting together a message that will resonate with your colleagues, with your support staff, and especially with your institutional leadership. On the screen is a worker in a factory. She's wearing a white coat and a red hoodie, and she has a plastic net over her hair. She's using a long grabbing tool to take an apple off of a conveyor belt full of apples. And what I want to do with this image is to say that universal design for learning actually reduces the need to make routine accommodation. Will we ever get to the point where, we won't have to do disability accommodations? No, we will still do one change, one time for one person. But we can make it so that far fewer people have to say, please treat me differently. And we have lots of research and data that show us that inclusively designed environments help people not to have to claim accommodations because they're just designed to be multiple format or multiple path. So that's one part of the argument that I like to make. Another part of the argument is providing more time for study and preparation. When is the last time you heard your colleagues say, my students haven't done the reading? My students aren't prepared for class. My students sit there like lumps and they don't engage, right? So when we think about universal design for learning, our students, many of them are traditional 18-year-old freshman students, but many of them are also returning adults. Many of them, even the traditional 18 to 22-year-old students, they have family responsibilities. They have work responsibilities. They are definitely jamming their studies into already busy lives that they need more time for studying. So on your screen is a woman at home. She's sitting on her couch. She has her book bag open. There's a textbook open. She's writing in a notebook on her lap, and her young son is asleep on her lap, clutching a stuffed animal to his chest. You can imagine if this is a single mom, she's got to drive her son to school and then maybe drive a further way to work and then drive back, pick him up, and maybe drive to campus to take an evening course with one of us. All of that travel, and whether that travel is from the residence halls to your classroom or it's traveling many kilometers in a circuit around your locality, all of that travel is time that usually isn't for study. But if her instructors posted the readings in PDF where in a place where she could get at them on her mobile device, and I'm holding up my phone now, she can use a Read It Out Loud to Me app, and there's hundreds of free ones out there on the Google Play Store or the Apple iTunes Store. Most of them were people's PhD projects. She could transmit that information through the speakers in her car, and she's just found 20 more minutes for study that she didn't have before. And the challenge that we face is that when we're talking with our colleagues, you notice I didn't mention disability yet. And it's counterintuitive. But if we start with a disability argument, our colleagues will only hear us with a small percentage of their ears, if you want to use a metaphor here. They'll think, oh, that our colleague is only talking about the, 2 or 3 students in my 25-person class who have claimed a disability accommodation. What our colleagues fail to realize is that it's more like 1 out of every 3 students in our institutions could claim a disability accommodation. And many of them do not for reasons of stigma, for reasons of cost, or for reasons of complexity, or for personal reasons. So the argument about disability typically isn't a good starting point. And I have to be very careful when I say that in a workshop like this. I am an advocate for the rights of people with disability barriers in their environments to get an education. When I'm talking with campus leaders, though, I want to talk to big budget level things. So, and I see we've got a wonderful side conversation rolling in the chat. Keep that going. That's fantastic. So let's do a little deeper dive and let's actually do the workshop part of our workshop. Thank you for sticking with me in the introductory times here. So as we're thinking through all of our ideas together, I'd like to offer 3 different frames in which you could make an argument to your campus leaders and to your colleagues. And there's a visual pun on your screen. There are 3 picture frames turned with their back to us. And this is my really bad visual pun way of introducing these 3 frameworks or 3 framing devices. The first frame is scope. When we think about universal design for learning, we always talk first about what individual instructors or individual staff members can do in their own work with learners. I'd like to suggest that universal design for learning works best when it is done at scale, meaning UDL, if an entire department adopts it, an entire school, an entire university, an entire institution adopts universal design principles, then it is much more difficult for one person to say, yeah, I don't buy all that stuff. You progressive people can do all that hand-holdy stuff. I'm just going to teach how I was taught, and lecture is just fine with me, and my students can sink or swim, and it's appropriate that some of them fail. It's much harder for that person to say, I'm going to continue to stick with, my older ways of teaching, when the entire institution says, we are all moving toward this inclusive goal, and we're going to support everyone to be able to get there. So scope. Another frame that I'd like to suggest has to do, excuse me, with the students on your screen who are flinging up their caps at graduation. And this is the kind of image that most of our campus leaders, our chancellors and presidents, they love to share smiling graduates of the institution. So impact, we have 30 years of data, and I'd be happy to share that information with everybody. We've got 30 years of data that show that inclusive design principles, especially universal design for learning, helps with student persistence. Students are there on day one and they are still there to take the final examination or finish the course project. It helps with student retention. More students take a class with me this term and then come back next term to take a class with you and continue their educational journeys. And satisfaction. More students say that they felt supported, that they belonged, that they were part of the institution, and that they recommend others to come and study there with us as well. So these are all keeping our paychecks coming and keeping the lights on in the buildings kinds of arguments. And Kate Mitchell says in the chat, she says, yes, preach. I've been trying to sell UDL and accessibility around the evidence for retention and student satisfaction because there is real evidence of this and it affects the bottom dollar. Now, I hate to be crass. At the same time, these kinds of arguments are the kinds of things that your campus leaders are already thinking about when they are looking at other campus-wide initiatives. And that is why my last frame to suggest for all of you is the budget. On your screen are some budget documents with a pen and a calculator sitting on top of them. And when we think about whether our students belong, whether our students feel like they have voice, choice, agency, safety, and belonging, that translates to a leadership argument to say more students will stick with us. If it costs us, and this is, we have data on this for North America where I practice, and there's also data for Australia where you folks are as well. If it costs us $10 in marketing efforts to find a brand new student and bring them into our institution, it usually costs us only about $2 every year in programming and services to keep the student with us. But if that student drops out, then we have to spend our $10 again to go find another student. So it's actually a lot cheaper to invest in the support services and principles like UDL to help keep the students we already have. We've already looked under all the other rocks and places where we try to find new populations of students. And usually the one population we haven't really looked at is the ones who are still with us, who are right here with us. Belinda's asking, is there a link to the data and research demonstrating these benefits of investing in UDL or similar? I'll point you to udloncampus.cast.org, and I'll put that into the chat. That's where you can find links to a lot of this research, as well as the UDL IRN, which stands for Implementation and Research Network.org, which is another place where you can find links to this research. And it is right now, the research is being done in a lot of these areas for higher education. This is people's doctoral dissertations within the last 3 or 4 years, where we have a lot of the data and research to back up some of the statements that I'm sharing in a general way here with all of you. Oh, cool. And Kate's saying for Australian context, there's proposed legislation around the university's accord that will put the emphasis on what the uni is doing around student support. Fantastic. Thank you. All right, now that we've got the frames here, now that we've talked about some of the pitfalls of how our colleagues might hear us, let's actually put some words together. Here's more students from Business Insider Australia tossing up their caps at graduation. It's outdoors. And we talked about persistence, retention, satisfaction. These are the kinds of arguments that our leaders will listen to. But how do we get data for our own institutions that show what these larger studies are also showing. So, and Justin saying early in his UDL journey, I left many colleagues and educators looking like they came out of a wind tunnel after my UDL justification. Well, and this is why I like to simplify this as much as we can. Your executives, your campus leaders, they will want to see the 40-page report that you produce. But what they really want to see is the one-page overview that helps them make decisions. So I'd like to ask, what's your 5-minute message if you had, as the student on the screen has, a couple of minutes with the chancellor or the rector or the leader of your institution? I'm going to put 5 minutes on the clock, and we'll play a little bit of music to hold some space for thinking. And I'll post the question in the chat. Remember, you can post your ideas in the chat. You can just lurk and take notes on a piece of paper for yourself. Or at the end of the 5 minutes, use the raise hand feature. It's under reactions, and we can recognize you. You can open your microphone and come on the microphone and share an idea as well. So let's get some music playing here. We'll take 5 minutes to think about, if you had 5 minutes, how would you frame your message to the leadership at your campus? Here comes the music. that one ended a little abruptly with the music, but we're coming back together, and thank you for posting your ideas in the chat. Would anyone care to come on the microphone and share an idea about how you might want to talk with your leadership colleagues or some of your other folks on campus or at your institution? I'm not seeing any hands raised. This, by the way, is another universal design for, here's Kate Mitchell with a hand and a couple other folks. I was about to say, here's a lovely UDL lesson. Even if no one chooses one of the options, it's still UDL. But Kate, would you kindly unmute your microphone and share your ideas with us, please?
Yeah, sure. Our institution is really having conversations around retention at the moment. I think, like, where possible, trying to show that there is like a clear link, that there's something actionable we can do around retention, and that's really around student support and universal design for learning. We're lucky here at University of New England that we are kind of in the midst of doing a big project around uplift and having some new kind of design principles that will apply to all of our units. That also includes UDL. So I think there is a little bit of a, I guess, university strategic alignment there that helps. But yeah, I'd be really trying to push that. We've got the new possibility of this support for students policy coming into action, which I can share in the chat. That's part of the University of Cord stuff that I mentioned, as well as those retention issues. And these will potentially, support both of those, as well as then support student engagement and satisfaction. So really, it's just trying to hit all of those kind of key points around what might be like financially and quality related that leadership might care about, especially where we are currently.
So if I'm summarizing a little bit of what I just heard you say, there are already mission, vision, values, policies that reflect things that universal design for learning also aims at. And if you can position UDL within those existing policies and goals, then you're already speaking the language that is part of the institution's path that it's trying to carve through the world. So I love the way that you're framing that. Thank you for starting us off. I see a couple of other hands. Let's take a look at some of the ideas that are in the chat, and we'll come back around to some of the folks who are queued for the microphone. Belinda in the chat says, I would tell my leadership, instead of funding multiple ambulances at the bottom of the cliff, let's remove the cliff. And we've got a lot of laughing emojis and thumbs up and hearts for that one. I'll also say, and I'll be blunt and honest here, that kind of argument typically doesn't work with our campus leaders. By framing things as deficit or crisis, then you're just getting in a long line of other people who are saying deficit and crisis. So one of the differences in the arguments that I like to share with folks is, like, I'm going to scroll down in the chat and pick up another one. Jackie Tinkler says, I start with how it aligns to the university's strategic goals and how it helps compliance with organizations like TEXA and student safety and support. Then it's something that is an answer to their problem. In other words, they've defined the challenge, and we can use UDL to address that challenge or meet that need or satisfy that criteria. And Jackie continues by saying, then they are interested. Then you need to show evidence and results. Start by addressing those needs. And they're thinking abstractly and not about individual students and staff. And then I work toward the details if we're needed, and we're getting there. So I love the way that Jackie is framing that. And Darren's talking in the chat about 4 brief points. It's good for the students, it's good for staff, it's good for our reputation, and it's good for the bottom line. And if you have some evidence for all of those little pieces, that actually works really well when you're having the conversation with campus leaders. Justin Wiley, I see your hand up. Would you like to unmute and be part of the conversation?
Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, look, I've borrowed a lot of words from what you said, taking down notes furiously as you're speaking. So I've made a little spiel. As I said, I often go way over the top. So students are the reason for that our institution exists. Giving them voice, choice, agency, and belonging means more students will feel supported to be successful in their studies. UDL allows us to be proactive to provide evidence-based support to all students that will help with motivation, retention, and their results. Our vision is to be the most inclusive regional university in Australia, and that's part of our vision. And we want CQU students to have the best learning experience they've ever had and carry that knowledge and understanding of how to learn into their careers and lives.
Did you all just hear what Justin said? He dangled bait in front of his campus leaders. He said, this is an opportunity for us to be the best regional university among our peers. There is nothing that our campus leaders want more than to be first in line in something. So I love that piece there. And I'm going to pair, Justin, what you said with what Amy Webster is saying in the chat. And that's an effective 1 and 2 for this. Amy says, think about a time when you needed to alter your hours to get to an appointment, or when you opted to Zoom into a meeting because you were feeling under the weather, or when you left your camera off because you were eating your lunch at the same time due to back-to-back meetings that day. These are all examples of UDL, and it isn't all about disability. You're already doing a lot of it, and it's easier than you think. I love the idea of putting administrators in the shoes of learners, or asking them about how they accomplish their day by utilizing affordances and making barriers go away or get lowered in those ways. And I want to end our time today with the next maybe 10-15 minutes with a little thought exercise to wrap things up. And I see a couple other folks had their hands up, and in the interest of time, I want to make sure you can get on to your next workshops. But thank you everybody for all of the ideas that you've posted into the chat. We will be sharing these chats with everyone after the conference is over with as well. Okay, on your screen now is the second part of what I wanted to share with everybody, and that is practices for universal design for learning. On the screen is a room with 7 doors on a wall, and one of the doors is a different color. So when we think about practicing UDL and we want to get up to scale, we can make arguments in slightly different ways. Now on your screen is a street somewhere in Israel, and it has steps that go up the left-hand side. There's a cat sitting on one of the steps. And on the right-hand side is a set of ramps that go back and forth. By the way, this is really bad accessible design, but there's someone pushing a colleague in a wheelchair up that ramp. And we can fall into the trap of doing things for our students versus designing agency into those interactions. And we do a lot of doing for a lot of our students, disabled and not. We do a lot of helping our students or giving them the lecture or giving them the idea. For example, I know a lot of faculty colleagues who bemoan the fact that students aren't as engaged or they haven't done the reading. And so when they say, hey, did you do the reading? Can anybody summarize the reading? And it's crickets, it's silence among the students. And after a couple of minutes, the instructor just goes into a lecture about the reading. What you're doing is you're training your students to keep quiet so that you will show them or teach them or tell them what they should have done in the first place. So we do a lot of doing for rather than designing into. This is an argument that really helps when we're talking with our faculty and instructor colleagues. Do you want to do less lecturing to students and have them more engaged? Do you want them to see value in doing the readings and preparation? Then design some of these options into their content. Here's a quotation from a scholar. Her name's Elizabeth Gregory. And this makes me break a presenter's rule. I'll actually read this one off to you. She says, a system that focuses only on disorder and individualized interventions misses the opportunity to address trauma through relational repair in every interaction. it is not too far of a stretch to say that our students experience trauma when they are trying to navigate the systems that we have put into place. They don't have models for how those systems work, and only we insiders really know all of the jargon, all of the steps, all of the forms. And we're talking not just about classroom instruction here, we're talking about the systems of our institutions as well. So when we think about UDL in fields like disability support services, like the folks from the Koori Deaf Mob who are standing outside in a conference that they were attending a little bit ago, and Kathleen saying systems can cause us trauma too as well. When we think about support services for our students, we use UDL paradoxically to lower barriers and make our work more focused on the people who need the more intensive affordances. And Jackie's saying it's also powerful for students to see other students cared for, and powerful to see trauma acknowledges. It shows a safer and caring place for everyone. So while we were talking about those big budget conversations with your leaders, when you're talking with your faculty colleagues, acknowledge their challenges. Lean on their shared experiences. Kate is saying in the chat about how during the pandemic, people are coming to terms with that collective trauma. I'd like to suggest as we wrap up and do a final thought exercise for our conversation today, that there's really 4 different ways that we can approach UDL. And I mentioned these at the top of our conversation. So on the screen are some students writing in notebooks or working on their mobile phones, and also a student working at home on a laptop. How do students interact with materials? Can we make that +1? How do students interact with each other? +1 for that. With our institution, with the instructors and support people, and how do they interact with the wider community? And I love Ray's idea in the chat, similar to the statement she's heard, that we can't empower people, but we can stop disempowering them. We can guide students to strategies that are becoming increasingly available and useful for lots of folks. And I'd also like to suggest that the people on our campuses who need to carry this message probably aren't our disability support offices. In fact, when the disability support people speak up in the meeting, everyone else says, oh yeah, they're just talking about the students with disabilities, and there can't be that many of them, right? And of course, you hear the irony in my voice. But we want to go beyond just those individual inclusion plans. And we see some students around a table talking through some of those conversations. So as we wrap up, I'd like you to do that role play over again in your head. You already have the ideas that we did for those 5 minutes. I'd like to encourage you on your own time after our session, describe what a UDL implementation would require. So make the request to one of your leaders. Actually write this up in several pages. Or put on your leader hat, and from the perspective of one of your campus leaders, what would you want from an inclusive project that lots of people could get involved in? In other words, if there were going to be a message from the chancellor that says, we are moving in this direction and we'll support everyone to do it, what would that look like? Or how would you frame, like one of our colleagues did at the beginning of our conversation, how would you frame universal design for learning inside the existing diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts already going on at your institution? Like the people on the screen here, these are faculty members at a faculty senate meeting, and one person is speaking into a microphone. So I'd like to leave you with that charge. And I'd also like to leave you with 2 quick tricks that you can use. One of them, here is the woman on her living room couch writing in her notebook again with her young son asleep on her lap. One of the tricks you can use is go look at the language that is already in your guiding documents and see where universal design for learning echoes that language. Make universal design for learning an answer to a challenge that your institution is already engaged about. And quick trick number 2, On your screen are two pilots. We are looking over their shoulders and we can see the instrument panel in their small airplane. I'm not talking about these pilots. I'm talking about the word pilot. When you say we're going to do a universal design for learning pilot, that means, oh, we may never do it again. It doesn't matter if it was successful, all that kind of stuff. So don't use the word pilot unless you're talking about someone flying an airplane. Talk about phase 1 of the UDL implementation. That implies that there will be a phase 2 and 3 and 17 and so on down the line. I know that this is a very specific shift in the language, but when you talk about pilots, people don't give a lot of money to pilots, and they don't put money in the budget every year for pilots, but they do it for campus-wide implementations. So here at the end of our workshop, I hope that you have learned something from your colleagues about how to talk with faculty, staff, and campus leaders once you get back to your role and your everyday work. And I'd love to hear what your big takeaway is from the workshop too. Here again, if you saw this photo on the in the keynote, is a table laden with food: guacamole, salsa, Mexican street corn, black beans, and a liter margarita in a jar. So what's your one takeaway? What's your one biggest takeaway from our workshop? And I'll put the question into the chat. And I'll read them off as quickly as we can put them into the chat. Or there's about 107 of us left here, but I'll have the margarita, please, says Darren. Carrie says this was very validating. Jane says, love the idea of changing language from pilot to phase 1. Ray says, facilitation tips. Pace brings everyone along together. Tabitha says, don't talk about pilots unless there are planes. Amy says, invite Tom to come to our university. I'd be glad to, by the way. Kathy says, phase 1 replaces pilots. Neil says, practical skills. Elizabeth says, this was fantastic. I want to model this, and I want to frame from a strengths-based approach all the things to be gained. Kathy says, I'll talk about phase 1. People dig that phase 1, don't they? Jennifer says the concept of doing for versus designing into. Chris says frame by staff members' own experiences with affordances. And a good reminder all around linking to strategic vision all the way, says Kate. And there's a bunch of other ones coming into the chat, but I want to make sure we have time for passing on to the next set of workshops. I hope you're enjoying the UDL Symposium. Thank you so much for being part of this workshop and being part of our event. I'll turn it back over to our hosts for some closing comments. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you so much, Tom, for such a wonderfully well-paced and engaging workshop. I think the chat is testament to how much appreciated your presentations always are. Just to pick up on a couple of key themes, people are loving the description and the pace as we've gone along, giving us time to process and not be cognitively overloaded. There certainly are some key takeaways, and everyone is taking from it something different that is practical and realistic to implement for them. So thank you very much. Always a pleasure, Tom. I hope some people do actually take you up on your enthusiasm to come to their universities. Do let us all know if you're coming to Australia. We would love that.
Fantastic. And I also have a practical note from the rest of the team. Watch your email. There's going to be a rating form for your experience of the various sessions and the whole conference. We'd love it if you took time to let the organizers know what went well, what they could do next time. And I'd love it if we took just a moment here at the end. Use those hearts and clapping and all that for our organizers. This is a fantastic event, and I'm grateful to have everybody's voices and ideas as part of it. So thank you, organizers, for putting this together, and thank you for inviting me to share it with you.
Thank you for the mutual appreciation, Tom. I would invite you all to head back to the lobby for our final session for the symposium, which is our student and educator panel. I'll pop the link for that in the chat. And also, please do remember to visit our poster presentations. Thank you, everyone. See you shortly for the student panel.
See you then. Take care. Bye.